Welcome to another episode of the Marc and Brian Show. Well, we actually haven't really come up with an official name, but we are playing around with keeping it REALTY, which is kind of neat little names.
Yeah. One of the people here came up with the idea of the name for the show is Keeping It REALTY, which I kind of like, but we haven't quite figured it out yet. And that's one of our worst things, is coming up with names.
That's always the hardest thing.
Yeah.
Even when starting the company, coming up, remember when we started BG Asset Management, it was a struggle trying to figure out a name for it.
Right, exactly. Now, if we could only get it down to the point where it's like the way David and I call each other names and coming up with names that way, then maybe, we'd come up with something there.
We may not be able to get a DBA license for that.
Exactly.
So before we get started, big shout out to our podcast sponsor, East Brother Beer Company. They're located in Richmond. Awesome beer. For all you beer fans, they make very classy, very classical tasting beers. So the way an IPA should taste, that's how they make it. The way a Pilsner tastes, that's the way they make it. They're located in a great, fun warehouse to visit over in Point Richmond on Canal Boulevard. So definitely hit them up, try their beer. You could find it now at a few stores, some bars, but I really think going to their actual place, their brewing company, is the best, because pool tables, ping pong tables, they got big bar TVs, fun time, plus taco trucks. Can't beat that.
No, can't beat that. No, as a matter of fact, coming from my perspective, I'm not a big beer drinker, but their beer is so good that I literally have to make sure I don't drink all of it. In fact, I always have to get one of my beer drinking buddies to share it with me, because otherwise I'll drink up as many of them as I can. But it is a great place to go. A couple of my other buddies there that you'll catch on another YouTube channel that I do, who are big board gamers, love to frequent that place. And it's got a great atmosphere for just hanging out, playing all kinds of board games and intellectual type of stuff while chatting up at the same time.
We'll have to do a whole nother segment on the board games, because I've been looking into Star Wars Legion, the board game, and looking at rules, the characters, and how you play that game. So we'll have to do a whole segment on that.
Oh yeah,
that'll be
definitely.
fun.
Yeah,
we'll mix
Eric
up
and
the
I
show.
will have you on the other show that we do on YouTube.
Yeah.
But no, that's a whole nother can of worms. But again, we're letting you into our little crazy quirks and personalities, and hopefully you enjoy it.
Okay, so let's get started here, and let's jump right into topic number one. So topic number one is Uber and Lyft announcing the IPO and what their impact on SF housing will be, or even Bay Area housing. So, Brian, why don't you start? What's your opinion on how it'll affect housing?
I definitely think it will have a great effect on housing in general in the Bay Area. That's one of the big unique things about the Bay Area, is that you have all these various employment centers that have grown up. Again, coming from my perspective as somebody who's invested all over the country in places like Arkansas, Tennessee, Texas, Florida, Maine, what you're always looking for are employment centers. And the more employment centers you get, the better it is for real estate values, real estate investing. So now, case in point with the Bay Area, originally it was just San Francisco and Oakland, kinda, as the big employment centers. But now you've got San Francisco, Oakland, Emeryville, Silicon Valley, and all these other places, all of which that are have companies that are actually making a lot of money. So when you hear about things like an IPO for Uber and for Lyft, then you can only imagine that a lot of those original people that were on that company are going to be coming about a lot of money. And so I've personally got friends from Facebook who benefited exactly from that thing. They were like number 28 on Facebook or number 30 on Facebook. And a lot of those individuals will want to stay in the Bay Area. You're going to see competition for higher end homes again. And then hopefully some of those early adopters will have been able to buy investments as well. This always does create some type of a surge, and it's one of the main reasons why you'll see more of a bigger spike in California, because of all the various employment centers, as well as the different types of employment. It's not just segregated down to like one type of class. There's literally, again, that's another whole segment.
My concern with this is, and what I've seen, I know several restaurant owners right there near Twitter, near a lot of the tech hubs in downtown San Francisco. And the one thing that they all say is, as soon as a lot of these young techies get money in their pocket, they go out and spend it. So they're literally going to restaurants and buying $100 bottle of wines for lunch, and they're going to lunch every single day. They're literally spending their money. So my concern is we may not see as big of an effect as we think, because at the end of the day, if you look at the trend of renters versus home buyers, you're still seeing more and more people going into renting, especially for a lot of the execs or the investors that are going to be making a lot of money on these IPO. A lot of them, surprisingly, do rent their properties because it gives them the flexibility to move around, because many people in the tech industry are jumping from job to job and they need that flexibility. They can't be held down by a mortgage and by buying a property. So it's very interesting. And so I agree there's going to be some kind of influx of cash coming in for sure. I just don't know how much it's actually going to affect the housing market, simply because I know quite a few techies that like to really spend their money.
Yeah, and again, at the end of the day, it's really hard to empirically track that data, and a lot of it becomes anecdotal. But again, just from my personal experience, and especially just segueing off of what you mentioned, a lot of the clients that I've come about from that type of IPO, I've always encouraged them to do what I did in the very beginning, which was to buy a 4-unit building, live in 1 unit, rent out the other 3, especially if you're a young entrepreneur or you're coming out of college. Not only does it help you pay your mortgage, but in the event you want to move out because your job has relocated you, you could easily rent out that unit, and then suddenly you have an investment that's actually generating a lot of income. So again, from my perspective, it's these types of trends in the Bay Area have always helped my personal sales, and of course, this always segues into possibly houses.
Now with the IPO though, who are going to be the big investors that make a lot of the big money? There's a lot of corporate investors already in these companies that they're going to be cashing out, and they're not going to be looking to dump the money back into real estate.
Well, again, you got to remember that a lot of in a lot of these IPOs, you're going to have references to people like number 28 or number 30 or number 40. And you go down this line all the way down to, say, the first 150 or 200 or more people. And then as you start getting further away from number 1, there's going to be people who have stock options that are going to come about, money closer to the tune of like $100,000 or $200,000, not necessarily the millions of dollars. And so you're going to have a good chunk of people who are going to ask that question of like, what should I buy a house? Or what should I buy? And again, when they encounter me, I'm always buy a 4-unit building or buy a triplex. You can always come in with very little down, like 3.5% down, and still create that flexibility, which again goes into other things that you could do, whether you're going to stay in the Bay Area or move out, things of that nature.
Okay.
But again,
do we know what's the exact date they're going to go IPO?
I don't know yet. As a matter of fact, that's the big question on everybody's mind. I've talked to a couple of people where
is the timing of it.
Yeah, it's the timing, and we're looking at different investments. And one of the things that has been a big buzzword is, well, I want to make sure I have enough money left over or keep some money aside for this potential IPO.
Okay.
Before I go put it all into real estate, which I think is a smart, wise decision to do.
Okay. Next topic is dropping number of affordable rent homes. So let's provide a little bit of background in how affordable housing industry works. You have experience with affordable housing and actually developing it.
Yes.
Also. So why don't you break that down?
To kind of put things in context, there was an article that came out that essentially said that a lot of low-income subsidized properties or apartment buildings, the owners on those properties are electing not to renew their contracts. And so to really understand what that means, you got to go back to the beginning on originally how that particular apartment complex was developed. And a lot of times these low-income housing or subsidized housing are developed with tax credits, and they'll target specific groups like, very low income, mid to low income, senior housing, things of this nature. And essentially what the government will do is they'll issue tax credits. Tax credits are sold on a secondary money market. So if you're issued $3 million of tax credits, you'll turn around and sell that to some big company like Apple or Microsoft, who will want to buy those tax credits that are worth $3 million for something like $2.8 million or $2.7 million.
So there's a whole market for buying and trading tax credits.
Yes, there is. My personal experience with it was, I I had an office in Richmond, which at the time had an enterprise zone, and so I was eligible for tax credits for my own employees. And again, for those who don't understand tax credits versus tax write-offs are tax credits are a dollar for dollar deduction on what you actually owe after you've taken all your deductions. So just putting things in perspective, when you build an apartment building or complex targeted to specific low-income groups, whether they're seniors or whether they're low-income housing or very low income, and you get these tax credits, it enables you to build a very nice facility. However, when you do that, you turn around and you sign these long-term contracts to keep this particular complex low-income housing. And
we're talking about 20 to 30-year contracts.
Correct. They're like 20 to 30-year contracts. And so after 20 or 30 years, you always have the right to renew the contract with HUD or decide to just go fair market. And again, the big drawback is that the HUD only has very low bumps and increases for rent, so anywhere from like 2.8 to 2.9 or 3%. And so when you have
even worse when they're cut in funding.
Exactly, even worse when they're cut in funding. And so when you have an apartment complex that was geared towards some type of a low-income bracket or senior housing, and now 20 years or 30 years have passed from when the original developer took tax credits to help build that facility, and now it's located right in the urban infill areas or where all the action's happening and all the .coms or IPOs are taking place. Suddenly, if they break that entire contract with HUD, they can have a empty building that goes right to fair market. And a lot of these buildings that were subsidized through tax credits using HUD money to build them up, they're gorgeous buildings. I mean,
and they're exempt from rent control.
They're exempt from rent control. In fact, there's a building right now where it's just a raw piece of land in Concord that I'm working on. I'm representing the owner, and the buyer, who's represented by another company, is a nonprofit. That nonprofit is actually eligible to take tax credits. And so, for example, just to make the long story short, they can build a $23 million building, a 62-unit building in downtown Concord, equip it with gym and educational centers, primarily geared towards senior housing, whereas when I run the numbers on the exact building, I have to stay within a budget of 18 to 19 million. So they can build this facility 2 to 3 times more expensive and still let it pencil because they're getting these tax credits. Now, of course, when they do that, they're going to have to tie themselves to these long-term contracts, 15, 20, 30-year contracts, which at some point in the future will expire. And that's what we're talking about here, is that some of those buildings that were once used or built through subsidized housing tax credits, they're now expiring. And they're located in places like San Francisco, Oakland. And so simply put, it's just not advantageous for the owners of that to renew the contracts, especially when you have such a shortage of housing in the Bay Area.
Now, what do you think HUD can do, or any other city, or how can you entice landlords to renew, or what other kind of subsidy would they need to say, yeah, we'll keep this as affordable housing?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, and I hate to say it like this, but it's a matter of being able to have a higher competitive market rent. And again, the rents in the Bay Area are really high, and you got this, dichotomy between trying to keep the rent low and subsidized from the government, which comes out of people like you and I's pocket from our taxes that we pay, and then this other aspect, trying to raise the rents to what they should be based on what the market will bear. So again, whenever these things happen and they don't renew these contracts for low-income housing for the entire building, it doesn't mean that that building is still not going or willing to accept places like, or things like Section 8, right? So you could still go primarily market rent and still, decide to rent out a majority of them to Section 8 housing, which actually stays pretty close to fair market rent values.
Okay, so the next topic here is very interesting because if you don't know who Gary Vaynerchuk is, he's media marketing genius, built multiple companies. He's an entrepreneur, very interesting to follow and listen to his tactics. Well, he does a conference every single year, and I think he's only done it for the last 2 or 3 years, called Agent 2020 or Agent 2021, where he teaches real estate agents and insurance agents, basically anyone who's an agent, how to market yourself and your business in order to do more sales. Well, this conference just happened recently. He gets back into town, goes on to an interview, and every interview and podcast that he does, his team also records it, and they put it onto their channel, his Facebook and YouTube channel. And so basically, fresh from a real estate conference that he put together, he comes back and starts talking about how it's not a smart idea to buy a home. Now, let's watch the video real quick and you'll see what I'm talking about.
I do not think the American dream should be buying a home anymore. I think it's full of shit.
Tell me more of that shit.
It's fucking bullshit.
Yeah.
It's a bad use of upfront capital, and it ties you up.
Correct.
And it's just not smart. Like, I'm pissed that I own a home.
Yeah.
I would literally rent in perpetuity now. And I will. Like, I've decided, like, I will never buy another new home.
I'm going to start off by saying I totally agree with Gary Vaynerchuk. But here's the thing. That's a very short clip, and that's what everyone's going crazy about. You have to look at the entire podcast, the entire interview to get the context. A lot of people follow Gary Vaynerchuk because of his skills as an entrepreneur and a marketer. That's what a lot of people follow him for. So when someone is a young person in their 20s and 30s and they have capital of 50 or 100 grand and they're told you should go out and buy a home, buy some real estate, and they want to start a business. So if you have 100,000 in capital and you want to go start a sock business versus buy a home, basically what he's telling you is don't buy the home. It's a stupid idea. Go put that money into the business that you want to do. If you want to buy a home, fine, buy a home, but then don't complain about not starting the business. So that's really the context of where that was coming from. And it's very interesting. Here in the Bay Area, I tell so many people, if you have the capital and the ability to buy a home, don't buy a home, but instead buy an investment property. Now, this is going a little bit to what you preach all the time, is buy an investment property. You live in the property. In fact, we just mentioned it a few minutes ago. You buy a fourplex, live in one of the units as if you're a tenant. After a few years, you buy another property and move out of it, and now you own a 4-unit building, and you just keep doing that on repeat. We have several clients, several friends that have done that, and after a 10 to 15-year period, you have a sizable real estate portfolio. The problem is you have to put in the time and get the idea of buying a home. So basically where this entire interview came down to is the real estate agent's upset that he said, don't buy a home. It's a waste of money. And, I have a client right now and a good friend of mine that he can afford to buy a $2 million property, yet he's choosing to rent in the city that he's buying or that he wants to buy in. And he did an analysis, and him and I literally just talked about this morning. He broke down the full analysis, and his cost to own the same home that he lives in, but he's renting right now, is $7,000 more after all the tax credits, mortgage interest deductions, after everything is done. $7,000 out of pocket every single month is what it will cost him to own. Not just that, $315,000 down payment. That's a lot of capital to give up every single month, and upfront capital in order to buy a home. He would rather have that cash in hand so he can make other investments, whether that be starting the business or buying other investment property. So that's where the whole argument of should you rent or should you buy? Well, for your personal residence, I'm a big fan of renting unless you're buying your dream home.
So again, going off of what Marc was saying, I kind of have to be on the side of disagreeing with what Gary said, primarily. And again, but I also agree with some of what he said. It depends on what perspective you're coming from. Now, again, let's just address it from exactly what Gary said, from the perspective of an entrepreneur who wants to start a business, say a sock business, and has money set aside. So I was exactly in that same position 28 years ago, right? So instead of me buying my first house, I bought a 4-unit building. And in fact, this was the exact methodology that I used for every one of my clients who came and said, hey, I've got 50,000, hey, I've got 100 grand, and I want to buy a house. What should I do? So what I always put into their mind, and eventually most of them would actually do this, is, hey, you don't own a house right now. You could buy a 4-unit building with 3.5% down using FHA. With that 3.5% down, it's like you're only using less than a quarter of the $100,000 or $50,000 you've set aside to do something. With that, you can live in one unit, rent out the other three, and then turn around and have that income while still having the seed capital to do other things, whether it's buy another investment property or start a business. Again, this was my exact perspective, right? So I was able to do this, and within a few months, I'm going to buy a house and have the mortgage pay for my house. I always like to do the math with every one of my clients on the rent versus own methodology. Again, you could do that exact thing by looking at an individual's income, looking at the write-offs they will get from the house, from taxes, from insurance, and then also from the principal reduction, and make that quick determination of here's my rent and here's my true cost to buy a property. Again, addressing it from the perspective of an entrepreneur, when you're looking for seed capital, especially for a new business, there's not a better place to do that than from your single family or 4-unit building. Whenever you buy a primary residence, whether it's a house, duplex, triplex, or fourplex, and you live in there for at least 2 years, each individual gets a $250,000 capital gains tax exemption. So when you have 2 people owning this home and they have that exemption, and you've looked at that property and you've timed it just right where you're able to sell it within 2 years or 3 years, you're able to generate a humongous amount of seed capital that's capital gains tax exempt from federal and state, while still having the benefits of the home, and then use that for whatever endeavor you're looking to do, whether it's start a stock company or buy another investment property. So I don't just invest in real estate. I've actually myself been an entrepreneur and added seed capital to other various completely non-related to real estate businesses. So when I hear that, hey, I should take all my $100,000 and allocate it all on just a new business that I'm going for, it goes back to the whole idea of you should always have a backup plan. So when I look at Gary's message of like take that entire $100,000 and allocate it towards that new business, especially if you're an entrepreneur, I have to disagree. I have to look at all the angles, set aside a portion of that for a house, look at the ability of what I could use with that other money to start and progress my business, while simultaneously and concurrently tracking the value of my fourplex or duplex or triplex or house as to when I could resell it, try to take advantage of that exemption and capital gain, which you could then again use for seed capital to continue to grow your business. Which is exactly what I did.
We should create a program for entrepreneurs that want to start a business, but at the same time have a backup plan.
Yes.
That'd be a good, I think be good for us to talk about.
That's more
later.
Of my perspective, not this all in, balls out kind of thing. And yeah, I'm really, really meticulous with how I budget my money. And this is the same exact thing that I try to tell and preach to all my clients.
Okay. So next topic here is a topic that's been discussed for many years, ever since I got into real estate 16 years ago. 16 years ago. You've been in real estate, what, 28 years?
I've been in the real estate 28 years, and this is actually going to be my 29th year in the business, 1991.
Wow. So the next topic here is real estate agents being 1099 independent contractors or W-2 employees. And basically a little history for many of you that don't know about the industry that much is that historically, real estate agents have to work under a broker, and brokers issue them a 1099 for all the commission that they've earned, and then the agent basically on their taxes acts as an independent contractor as if they're self-employed. Actually they are self-employed. They list their gross commission earned, and then from there they do their deductions for business expenses, marketing, etc. Now,
and in fact, just to kind of interrupt you there, essentially, each real estate agent isn't an employee. They're more of an entrepreneur onto their own. And the broker that they work with is more of their business partner in many respects. Because that individual agent does have to have that whole entrepreneur business mindset in order to succeed in business. Which, actually, I'll jump back to that point as we go to the idea of the possibility of it going to a W-2.
Yeah, so the IRS has been really looking at real estate agents for probably the last 15 years and saying, well, do they fall under independent contractors or as employees? Because in the real estate industry, you have a lot of brokers that will require business cards to look the same. They'll require agents to attend office meetings, do floor time. And there's a lot of things that brokers try to instill or try to guide their agents to do in order for the company to work as one whole company. The problem with that is it's a gray area, because at what point do you cross the employer-employee threshold? Because if you are telling someone what to do or how to run their business, well, technically it's not a business anymore, and you're their employer telling them what to do. And so that's where this whole debate of, are real estate agents independent contractors or employees? Now, with real estate agents being independent contractors, IRS, they're not collecting employee wages and taxes. Yet if they switched real estate agents to a W-2 employee, they'd be able to collect a lot more in taxes. So of course there's that aspect to it where the IRS wants to collect more in taxes. So that's really the whole history of it. The Realtors Association has really fought against it to keep the industry the way it's been operating since forever, I think.
No, I agree.
Right?
In fact, kind of segueing off of what you said, I do think that if this does actually occur, where the IRS kind of steps down and now makes all licensees or broker associates to the managing broker a W-2 employee, you're going to see a huge number of the offices go away, primarily because, again, earlier I said that you kind of have to already be in the mindset of an entrepreneur, kind of like being a self-starter, because I always tell any new agent looking in, I'm not going to tell you to come in at 9 a.m. in the morning or 6 a.m. in the morning, which is usually what I'll do. I'll come in really early and I'll stay really late and I'll get a lot of things done. It's really up to that individual. So unless you're that type of a go-getter and you have that entrepreneurial mindset, you're not going to be a great agent. And there's a lot of not great agents out there. In fact, the average number of sales for a typical real estate agent is like 6 a year.
Six a year, and total income is about $39,000.
Right.
Was what NAR came out with. That's before deductions. After deductions, your average agent makes $29,000 take home.
Right. And so the point behind that is that right now, whereas the 1099 mindset enables a lot of agents who don't necessarily have that go-getter attitude to be employed or be active in the business to do their, 6 or 7 or 8 deals a year. When you go down the line of offices or brokers who can just hire agents, and there's a little bit less risk to that agent because they don't have to pay them a salary. It's kind of they get paid if they perform. But now with the W-2 aspect, again, this is a big question mark: is are you going to have to pay that individual a salary or some type of a stipend, and then a portion, and then how much of the actual closing? Or are they going to get? Because then the commission splits will probably drop. So what that'll probably
Well, the commission drops for the agents will drop,
Yes.
and the broker is going to take more.
The broker will have to take more.
Yeah, because it's going to cost the broker a lot more money to keep them employed.
Right. And so the point behind that is that when you have a lot of these really not the best entrepreneur mindset agents and not the best entrepreneur mindset brokers or these offices, because you'll see them. Being in the business 29 years, I've had the privilege of being able to see a lot of offices come and go. And usually they'd go away because eventually the broker will go, I thought I'd make a whole lot more money, but I don't really know how to run a business. And so when they realize what their bottom line is, they're like, I make so much more money working under another broker. You're going to see that big separation of offices where they really decide who should stay in the market and who shouldn't. It all comes down to and same thing with brokers. They'll probably go down the list of their agents and say, I'm going to keep you, but I'm going to let you go because you really don't perform. And now that I'm obligated to pay you something, I'm going to have to treat this just like any real more rigid business model.
I think what's going to happen is, so if you did not see our episode last week, go back and check that out. We talk about the ghost agents and the Keller Purge. And Keller Williams is a perfect example of this, but I think it's going to happen to every brokerage just on different scales. Keller Williams has 119,000 agents. They're going to purge their ghost agents, the ones that really don't, that shouldn't be on their roster, period. But if this were to happen, do you think Keller Williams is then going to employ 119,000 agents under their company? Absolutely not.
No, absolutely not. I mean, even with the 29 people that I have under me technically, I could think of at least half that I would have to just say goodbye to or more, just because I could look at their actual performance levels and go, hey, it's time to think about a different career.
Yeah.
And again, this is kind of what that mandate from separating 1099 to W-2 would probably just kind of usher in.
Okay, so now our second segment of the show is we like to do a quick property analysis, discuss a property, and at the end basically tell you whether it's a buy or pass.
Great. So the property that we're going to analyze today, and we're not going to talk about actual addresses, is a currently active on the market 18-unit building in the city of San Pablo. And again, a couple of great things about San Pablo is it's a very up and coming city. The city itself is very pro development and
pro business
and so they're actually looking to try to bring in a lot of commerce and business into the city to kind of continue to redevelop it. And so with the property we're talking about is in the city of San Pablo. I personally own apartment buildings myself in San Pablo. This particular one is 18 units and it's asking $4,600,000. Now, a couple of really important things here is that it advertises itself as a 6.06 cap rate. And I'm going to get back to this point in a second because whenever I analyze and really go through and audit each of the properties as to how they arrived at that, a lot of times I'll usually come in a lot less. In this particular one, I came in at like 5.81, which I'll arrive to in a second.
So one thing I want to point out is, and I run across this myself on some analysis when I run them for clients, is that you have someone marketing the property at a specific cap rate, but that specific cap rate is based on that owner's financial figures. So,
or sometimes they just lie.
Or they lie. Yeah.
Well, in this case, they didn't lie. They fluffed. And in the industry, there's a thing called fluffing where you kind of make, you try to put things in their best light to kind of make them look better. And again, everybody's guilty of this. You see this a lot, with some companies more so than others. In this one, they weren't that far off. When they advertise a current cap rate of 6.06 and I come out with a 5.81, which is just a little bit below, that means they didn't really blatantly lie. A lot of times you'll see that.
Well, a good example is if someone bought the building many, many years ago and their property tax is really low.
Right.
And then you have to run the numbers at what your tax rate would be after you buy the property.
Well, in cases like this, what I experience more is that they will just reduce the amount of actual cost for property management per se. Like in this particular case, they were using a much, much lower than even what a bank or an underwriter would deem to be acceptable management rate. So when I bring it up, they were using like 3. Like 2.75. So when I ratcheted it up to at least 6 or 5, then it was actually more acceptable. The expenses went up from like $128,000 a year, and that's based on the new taxes. So they were good about that. They took the actual new taxes, new bonds, or current bonds, and they arrived at that 6.06 number. But as I start auditing all of their numbers, I see some of them are a little bit lower than what they should be. A big question my partner and I, because I was actually looking at the building with my partner as a possible new purchase to buy. We're thinking is that, hey, the rents that they're currently advertising there are actually a little bit higher than what they should be, especially when you're looking at it from the perspective of an owner who owns buildings in San Pablo, right? So in this case, they were using a lower than normal management fee, but it wasn't that bad. So it was actually a pretty good property. In fact, it's something I would be more interested in. Now, the really cool thing I thought about this was that they said that the current cap rate with its actual expenses was 6.06, but the market cap is 6.58. Right. So what they're essentially saying there is, hey, you can offer less on this particular property because for those of you who don't know, the inverse reaction between cap rates is the lower the cap, the higher the price. The higher the cap, the lower the price. Essentially what you're saying when you talk about just cap rate is if I buy this building all cash, what's my return going to be? And if the market cap is higher, what it's saying or indicating is that investors are perceiving risk in the market, and so they need to have a little bit higher return on a particular property if they're going to invest. So again, this is one of the first few times where they say something like, the current cap is 6.06, but the market cap is 6.58. Usually it's the other way around. They'll show the market cap being a little bit lower. And then, a couple of really cool things about the property was that the building itself has been completely renovated, right? So one of the things I always like to do is check the public records. What did the current owner who's selling it buy it for? And then I'll do a reverse calculation on how much they currently own so that I could look at, well, hey, here's their capital gain. Here's what they're going to make if I give them their exact price. And try to determine what their current principal is on paying off the loan. In this particular instance, I noticed that the owner actually borrowed more than their purchase price. Now that's a big indicator of the fact that they bought this with a construction loan or a rehab loan. And so this will account for the fact that the building and the units themselves are renovated really heavily. In fact, when I was going through this analysis with my partner, who were looking at buying the building, I was looking at this and going, man, they were probably spending upwards of 20 grand per unit on rehab. And he's like, really? You think they spent that much? And I'm like, well, yeah, I think you should probably talk to my other partner over here, you know, on what you should estimate for turnovers. And again, this is coming from a perspective of a guy who remembers when a turnover was like $3,000, right? And again, that just accounts for inflation and things of that nature.
You know, here's a little fun fact.
Yeah.
In the city of Hayward, you can decontrol a unit as long as you spend $2,000 in capital expenses.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it was 2,000 because when they enacted it, 2,000 was a lot.
Yeah, I know. 2,000 was a lot, right? And I remember when 2,000 was a lot, you know, sometimes I have to like, you know, kick myself and go, oh, that was 30 years ago.
Yeah, average cost for a turnover right now is about 8 to 12 grand, depending on certain material quality that you want. But you do have some turnovers that do get up to 20, 25,000, depending on the size of the unit, some really high in quality material, and depending on how much you want to kind of spruce it up to get that top market rent.
Yeah, in fact, when you look at the slide 8 here and you talk about the expenses that they're using, you know, one of the things, and again, I have to kind of this goes along with the due diligence if you actually get into contract, is why are these expenses a lot lower than what I would normally anticipate? In fact, in this particular instance, the expenses they are talking about are only accounting for about 28% of the gross income. Now, a quick rule of thumb is that you're going to want to be in the 35, 38, maybe 40% of your effective income for expenses. And this was at 28. When I reran it myself and plugged in a little bit more of the numbers, I was getting 33, 34, which is still a little bit low on the low side, but might account for the fact that they just basically gutted the entire 18 units and renovated it with this construction loan. So again, you're going to enjoy a little bit more of that honeymoon period where you're not going to have to put as much into capital improvements because of the work that was done. The only thing is that this particular building doesn't have a new roof. So one of the things you got to account for is, hey, are the capital improvement reserves that I'm accounting for in my budget to determine that annual expense, does that account for being able to save up enough money for a roof? And when can I anticipate that roof will fail where I have to replace it?
Yeah, and just on a side note, we took over management of a building that's a 9-unit complex.
Mm-hmm.
The person bought it through another real estate agent, not through our company, but they did not get a roof inspection.
Oh, yeah, that's really bad.
Yeah, and so guess what we found out with the recent rains?
Roof was bad?
Roof is bad.
Wow.
It's already at 27, 28 years of its life, and it has to be completely replaced. $32,000 roof replacement cost.
Well, this is why I always preface any one of my clients who's looking at a property with, don't get emotionally attached to the property. I might be the guy telling you not to buy the property. I mean, it goes against everything what we're supposed to do, because obviously if I tell you not to buy a property, I'm not going to make a commission. But again, it's better to not make that commission and just take that client to another property that the way they won't encounter that, or at least be fully aware if you are going to need a new roof so you can properly budget for it and determine whether if you're that 28% or 40% expense bracket when you're looking at your actual income, right? So again, it's a big balancing act. We could talk for hours about it, you know, but.
Okay, so from a management perspective on this building, it would essentially be very easy to manage because most of the units or all the units are completely remodeled, right?
Well, again, that's what I'm anticipating.
Okay, you haven't seen it?
I haven't seen it. My partner's seen it. I'm actually going to be, moving forward and seeing, trying to do a little bit more due diligence. And if we actually tie it up into contract, then again, we'll get to unravel all of these different aspects of it. Again, for those that don't know, when you get into buying a building, you're going to be in a contract for 60 to as much as 90 days. And of that first 30 to 60 days, you're going to be doing your due diligence. I like to call it the dating period, right? You've said hi, you've gotten into contract, but now you're checking everything out to see if you want to make this long-term commitment on this building. And sometimes you might just have to cut bait and go. And that's when I haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
We're just looking. We haven't even gotten on our first date yet.
Yeah, so the quality of the material though on this property is going to be a big determining factor, because on tenant turnovers, when you buy a building, you're always going to have tenant turnovers at some point. The quality of the material depends on how much your future costs are going to be on tenant turnovers.
Yes.
If you put in the vinyl plank, high quality, waterproof, water resistant, scratch proof flooring, or even tile flooring, your flooring costs are going to be extremely minimal to none every time you do a tenant turnover. So
we should have a whole nother segment on like bulletproofing your units.
Yeah,
For
exactly.
the type of tenants that you might get, right?
Yeah, and for a lot of our units, that's essentially what we're doing, and making them bulletproof to turnovers, to where it gets to a point where we literally go in and just do a quick paint job and done.
Right.
And when we use the same paint scheme on all the rentals, all of a sudden it's easy because we have a ton of extra paint.
Ton of extra paint, economies of scale. But anyway, that's a whole nother segment on really being a good, efficient
Correct.
landlord and maintaining your buildings properly.
Yeah.
But with all that said, I think we're just about out of time. We want to respect with the things that we said earlier, which is to keep our segments within a time where you can actually watch and enjoy it without us rambling on forever.
Yeah.
So with all that said, again, tune into our YouTube channel. Please tell us what you think. Ask us questions. We would love to interact with you guys. And
If you have a building that you want us to analyze for you, send us a DM or email, and we'd be more than happy to do that for you. Thank you to East Brother Beer for sponsoring the show. Awesome beer. I enjoy this beer. It's one of my favorites of all time.
Yes, I have been enjoying the beer throughout this little segment. Thank goodness for very low body fat. I feel it that much more than you.
Thanks for watching.
It's a great place. Check it out.
You just call me fat.
I did not.